We've all grown up listening to stories, and the ones who read have grown up reading books. In this course, where we're talking about literary genres, it is time we talk about story, novella, and novels. This is going to be the longest topic, so I've divided it into two lessons. So it's going to continue on to the next lesson because we're going to discuss each of them in detail. Let's start with it. Here's the seventh lesson in the course, Literary Genres, which is the first part of the topic short story, novella, and novel. In this particular lesson, we're going to talk about the meaning of these terms, the difference between these terms, and we'll discuss the genre short story in detail. It is being explained by Prakhar Patidar. I am a student of English literature, and let us start by understanding the meaning of these terms. A short story has been defined to be a brief work of prose fiction with organized actions, characters, and narration. A novella is middle-length prose work that's longer than a short story, but it's shorter than a novel. And novel is a term applied to lengthy works of fictional prose. So the basics of all these three are same, the components are same, but the difference there is in the length of these three works, or as Aristotle has defined it, in the magnitude of these three works. The sub-differences which are created are because of the relaxation that is provided in length when we go from a story to a novella to a novel. The lengthier the work, the more opportunity does a writer have to experiment with the plot and to develop the plot and to develop the characters. And this is a major reason why short stories usually have flat characters and novels have round characters. This is the reason why novels have complex and varied narration, whereas novella and short stories have basic linear narration. Let us talk about short story in detail. What a short story does is that it organizes the actions, thoughts, and dialogues of characters into an artful pattern of a plot directed toward particular effect on audience. So any narration or any telling of an incident or experience won't be called a story. It has to be weaved in a particular manner to fit into the definition of a story. The plot of a story may be comic, tragic, romantic, or satiric, and it is presented to us in either the first person, the second person, or the third person point of view. A short story or a story may be written in the mode of fantasy when it has elements of supernatural and spiritual kind. It may have been written in the mode of naturalism when it supports the belief that world is ruled by natural laws and not the supernatural or spiritual laws. Or it may be following the philosophy of realism, where the writer wants to represent the real world through the story. So the story is very realistic. Any kind of story, be it a short story or a novella or a novel, has five major components, five main components. These components are characters, setting, plot, conflict, and theme. Let us talk about characters first. A character of any story are the persons represented in dramatic or narrative works interpreted by the reader on the basis of their dialogue and actions. And whatever motivates a character or drive a character, the basics of their temperament and morality are called motivations. A character may remain same throughout the story or the character may change, and depending on this, we have two types of characters, flat and round characters. Flat characters are the ones that do not change throughout the story. These characters are also called two-dimensional characters, and they're usually built around a single idea or quality. Usually the characters of short stories are flat characters. Round characters are, on the other hand, complex in temperament and motivation, and they are represented with subtle peculiarity and individuality because a lot of thought is put into creating these characters. They don't just revolve around a single idea or a single belief. There's more to these characters. And usually the characters of novels are round characters, at least the protagonist and the antagonist. Second important component of any story is the setting. It can be described as the environment or surrounding in which the story takes place, in which the poem takes place if you're talking about poetry. And the setting, if you're talking about the setting, then there are three things which must be talked about, which must be kept in mind. They are the environment, place, and time. By social environment, we mean the kind of society that is depicted in the story, the kind of conventions which are followed by the people in the story. By place, we mean where the story is taking place, whether it's in the whole of the universe, or it has a world as the setting, or a particular country or a particular city, or the story may be taking place in a school or in a cottage. And by time, we mean what is the time period that is represented in the story. A story can be of ancient times, it can be of contemporary times, it can be of 18th century. You get the gist, yes? The third important component is plot. How do we define a plot? A plot, in very simple words, is the sequence of how the story plays out, the sequence of events and the sequence of actions which are committed by the characters. So the plot is constituted by events and actions organized to achieve a particular artistic and emotional effect. If the novel is very character centric, then the whole of the plot, the advancing of it, depends on the actions and the decision of the character. The name that has been given to plot by Aristotle is mythos, and a plot may play out in three parts. It usually plays out in three parts, that is the beginning, the middle, and the end. For example, if we take the example of the story of the fox and the grapes, the beginning would be when we are introduced to the fact that the fox sees the grapes and he wants to have the grapes. The middle part is when the fox tries to have the grapes, and the end part, that is the conclusion or the resolution part, is when the fox decides that he does not want it because the grapes are sour. They would be sour anyway. It's like the beginning is the introduction part, the middle is the action part, and the end is the conclusion part. This action I've been talking about, which help the plot advance. Why are these actions there? Because of the fourth important component of a story, that is conflict. A conflict in literature is defined as any struggle between opposing forces. Usually the main character struggles against some other force. So because of this conflict, the character takes certain steps, the character does certain actions which in turn advance the plot. Conflict can be of three kinds. It can be the protagonist against a man. Here a man can be a person from his family, mainly the antagonist. And then the second kind of conflict is when the protagonist is facing any natural opponent, when there is an opposition from the environment he's living in or she's living in, or it can be in the form of any abstract idea. And then the third kind of conflict is the protagonist against himself or herself. This is when the problem is there in the mind of the conflict, a mind of the character. A very good example of this is Hamlet by Shakespeare, when the whole of the problem is because of the conflict of mind of Hamlet, because he cannot decide what is there and what to do and when to do. The fifth important component which decides whether a story is a good story is the theme. How do we define theme? Theme is a general concept or doctrine on which the story is based. It can be a central idea, a message, or a lesson. Themes are usually of two kinds. It can be either implicit, which is implied. So the writer does not directly establish it, but implies the theme. And the second kind is that of asserted kind, when the theme is asserted, when it is pretty much clear. You don't have to read between the lines to deduce what message the writer is trying to give. There are three main types of short stories. First is tales. Tales are the kind of stories which revolve around a particular incident, which tell about a particular incident. Second is allegorical stories, and it further has subgenres, that is fable, exemplum, and parable. Fable is when a story is told with characters that are played by animals. Exemplum is a story which is about a particular instance, but it gives out a general theme. It revolves around a general theme. And parable is a didactic form of story, and it's the telling of a particular incident through which the reader should be inspired, or through which the writer aims to inspire the reader. The third kind is frame stories. Frame stories are usually a collection of stories in which the next story begins with the ending of the first story. Examples of this are Canterbury Tales by Chaucer, the Arabian Nights, or if you have listened to, everybody of us, since we live in India, have grown up listening to the stories of Panchatantra. They are frame stories. And that's it. What are we going to do next? In the next lesson, we're going to talk about the genre essay, the genre of prose, subgenre of prose, essay. And I hope this helped. Thank you for taking this lesson. Please continue on with the course because we are left with 4 or 5 lessons. I hope this helped. If you have any suggestions or doubts, please leave it in the comments. I'll try my best to correct your doubts and clarify your doubts and adopt your suggestions. Thank you.